Warning, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. Hello everybody and welcome to the Derek Ruby Show. I am your host, the previously mentioned Mr. Ruby, and this is Halloween month on the Derek Ruby Show. And what better way to kick off Halloween month than with a review of Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. So the movie starts off like most 80s movies with a god-awful long opening credits sequence. And this thing is long. It's actually about 3 minutes long. It shows a pumpkin with graphics that looks like it came from a 1980s computer. It's very seizure-inducing on top of that. Our movie opens up with a lot of potential. It's on a dark street. The music and sound cues are good. We see a man named Harry running. As he's being chased by a car, Harry runs into a junkyard and he's trying to hide. But he's doing a horrible job of it. Just look at him by that trailer door. He might as well just be standing against the wall and whistling. I know the movie's trying to invoke fear right here, but the guy is just not doing a very good job trying to hide. But surprise, surprise, he does get caught. And when things start to look bad for Harry, he pulls a chain and removes the block out from under a car. And we witness one of the most clunkiest deaths I've ever seen. So Harry picks up a mask and he runs off into the night. Then we get a scene at a gas station with a man named Walter. He's watching the television and we get to hear the Silver Shamrock song.
8 more days to Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. 8 more days to Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
Now the musical score to this movie is really good, but you're going to hear that Silver Shamrock song over and over again throughout the film. So Walter hears a noise and he gets up to look around and... Jesus, just knocking on the door simply would probably have been better. Walter takes off with Harry in the truck. This is our lead character, Dan. This scene is really set up to introduce him and establish that he's not a very good father. And of course, push the Silver Shamrock commercial again. So Dr. Dan gets called into the hospital and he has to leave, pissing off his ex-wife. So Walter brings Harry to the hospital. He's on the stretcher, we see the Silver Shamrock commercial, and he starts talking gibberish again.
They're going to kill us. All of us. All of us.
They give Harry medical attention and they leave him in his hospital room. And as is in the case with most Carpenter movies, the hospital is completely empty and practically devoid of staff. A strange man enters the hospital and apparently is not noticed by anybody, as he's able to walk right into Harry's room, and then we get to see one of the goofiest deaths I've seen in a long time. The nurse walks in on the man and she asks him what he's doing there, but he has no fucks given and just ignores her. She screams and alerts Dan, who wakes right up, and he begins to chase the man through the hospital. And when I say chase, this is really ridiculous because it's like a reverse Michael Myers. The man is just walking and Dan is just running through this long hospital corridor. Yet for some reason, he just can't seem to catch him. As Dan makes it outside the hospital, for Christ's sakes, the guy's already in the car. He pours gasoline on himself and he lights a lighter. You know, I'm not going to pretend like I know everything, but I'm pretty sure that's not going to make a car explode just like that. The next day, when the police and everybody is there, Harry's daughter Ellie shows up, and she gives an Academy Award-winning performance.
What happened?
Oh, some crazy man. Killed himself in the parking lot right after. Drugs, probably.
Is that it? My father's dead because of some crazy...
The whole thing is under investigation.
Oh, dead.
After she talks to the police, we get this awkward moment in the hallway where Dan and Ellie just stare at each other. Dan goes and talks to his friend the coroner to ask her to go ahead and take a special interest in this case, because just something doesn't feel right to him. Now Dan's drinking at a bar and we can clearly see the original Halloween on the television. And this is one thing the movie should not do. Don't remind me that there's a better Halloween movie that I could go out there and watch, Because based off what you've shown me so far, you're just begging me to either walk out of the theater, change the channel, or turn the movie off. Ellie walks into the bar and she asks Dan if her father said anything that night at the hospital. And Dan tells her father said that he loved her. And she knows that's a lie. And just out of nowhere, he says,
I saw something that night. I don't know, your father came into the hospital and I thought he was crazy, out of his mind. He's hanging on to a Halloween mask. He wouldn't let it go. And what he said was, they're going to kill us all. And in a little while, he was dead. And I don't know what the hell is going on.
That's not a little creepy at all, is it? Ellie and Dan go to her father's shop and they check the records to see if there's anything that could indicate what happened to him before he died. And they realize he went to Santa Mira to pick up an order of masks for the Halloween shop. So of course they agree to go take a road trip. Before our road trip starts though, Dan has to argue with his ex-wife and we gotta get some Miller High Life product placement. After all, it is the champagne of beers. The road trip is really long and we get a lot of boring exposition. Then when they drive into town, everybody blatantly stares at them. And I mean the entire town. There is even a camera up there. I think this movie is trying to establish like what you see of something like The Twilight Zone or some of the older movies and TV shows where everybody in the town is odd. But for whatever reason, it doesn't come off as scary. It just comes off as kind of weird. So they decide to get a room at a cheap motel, which has a nice little slogan.
It's cozy, it's quiet, and the price is right.
Dan sneaks off to check the logbook to see if Ellie's father had been there before. And I say sneak off, but it doesn't seem like it would be that hard to catch him. As Ellie and the motel clerk are outside, we get a shot of a limo of Connell Cochran, who couldn't possibly be the villain of the story, could he? As Dan is walking back, he almost gets hit by a bike that falls off an RV. And we meet a family that's also going to stay at the motel, but they're really not that important at this point. But they will be more important later. As Dan is walking to the motel door, he almost gets hit by a car. Man, 80s drivers must be terrible. Dan and Ellie decide to stay the night. Dan offers to sleep in the car, but Ellie replies,
Where do you want to sleep, Dr. Chalice?
I got an 80s haircut and a stash looking like Magnum P.I. Where do you think I'm going to sleep? I'm a man's man, baby. Then we get to hear Jamie Lee Curtis' voice on the loudspeaker.
It's 6 o'clock. It's 6 o'clock. Curfew. Curfew. All residents of Santa Mira, please clear the street.
So Dan buys some booze and he runs into a homeless guy. And before I go any further, I just want to say, I love the cinematography here. I love the way the shots are set up. When the movie is going for that really dark atmosphere, it does it 100% right. So the homeless man says,
Saw that bottle. Thought it looked pretty heavy. I ain't got no diseases. You mind if I have a drink?
Well, that story checks out. Dan asks about Connell Cochran, and the homeless man begins to talk all kinds of shit. And he says that he's going to burn the factory down with Molotov cocktails. Surprise, surprise, it isn't too long before the homeless man is caught by the goon squad. That has to be one of the fakest looking deaths I have ever seen. It's probably not the fakest, but it is up there. Ellie meets a woman named Marge and they talk about the factory a little bit. Dan checks in with the coroner, but she doesn't really have any new information for him. Then when Dan gets back to the motel, we go right into the action. Because it is an 80s horror movie after all. Then they start to mess around for a second time and Dan asks her this question.
How old are you?
Relax. I'm older than I look.
No IDs or nothing needed. That's good enough for Dan. Marge starts messing with her silver shamrock button, and something weird happens.
What's that?
Who cares?
Hell yeah, Dan, I'm with you on that one, buddy. So an ambulance shows up and Ellie and Dan go outside and they meet Mr. Cochran, who tells them,
It's all over, my friends, just a small accident.
Yeah, that looks like a small accident to me too. So the next day, Dan calls his coroner friend and she thinks something's up. Unfortunately, they're being bugged. So Dan and Ellie go to the factory to check and see if Harry ever picked up his order. And they have a run-in with the family we met before as well as Mr. Cochran. And then they're invited on a tour of the factory. On the tour, the kid asks Mr. Cochran if he can have a Halloween mask. Mr. Cochran gives him a different mask and says that one hasn't done the final processing yet. Dan looks around and notices all the different men staring at them, which is really weird because Dan's supposed to be a doctor, but if you didn't know any better and you came into this movie, you would think that he was either a private investigator or a detective of some kind. After all, he has displayed very thorough investigating skills so far.
I ain't got no diseases. You mind if I have a drink?
How old are you?
Relax. I'm older than I look.
So he points this out to Ellie, and she notices that her father's car is in one of the garages. She walks over to the garage, and these men step out in front, and we get a very odd stare down. Nobody says anything. It's just really awkward. They get back to the motel, and Dan decides to call the police, but the phone doesn't work. And when he gets back, surprise, surprise, the door's open and Ellie's gone. Dan turns around and he sees 4 men in suits heading right for the motel. He shuts the door and our chase is on. And I have to tell you, this is my favorite part of the whole movie. The one thing that they do right is they get this chase right. Like I said before, when it comes to the cinematography and the dark atmosphere of this film, whenever they go this route, it completely works. We do get a small scene where we see Ellie getting taken into a garage, which kind of takes away from it a little bit, but that's okay. We also see Dan trying to use a payphone and it not working, and then he's hiding in the payphone. Now, some younger people might think this looks stupid, but this is very common in older movies, and it actually invokes that sense of dread. We even see Dan going down an alleyway, and then when the lights come on, he legitimately jumps because he almost got caught. So Dan climbs up a window and he sneaks into the factory. So Dan sneaks around the factory using his doctor skills, and he finds an old woman and starts asking her questions.
Where is she? Where is she?
I guess that was supposed to be a jump scare. Surprise, Dan gets grabbed out of the dark and we get some semblance of a fight scene, which is pretty much one of the only fight scenes we have in the entire movie. So now we learn the truth that all these people are robots. So Dan, of course, being caught, this is all explained to him on an elevator. And it makes much more sense why some of the deaths and things that happened in the movie looked really terrible. Which is a big flaw, by the way, because the audience don't know that these people are robots when all these earlier deaths happen. Now it's Halloween Day and they take Dan to the control room and they show a big piece of Stonehenge. Cochran claims that it has a power, a force. Does he care to elaborate on that? Not really. So as Dan and Cochran watch from the control room, the family from earlier is locked in a room. The Silver Shamrock commercial plays, and the young boy puts on the mask. And now we get to see the effects of this commercial, besides the jingle part of it never leaving your brain. So that's the big plot reveal, is that the heads will turn into bugs and snakes. It's not a deal breaker for me, but it's pretty fucking stupid. Then we get a montage of the kids all over the country in their Halloween masks. So I guess that's a pretty huge plot by making all the kids' heads turning into bugs and snakes, but maybe just melting them or something would have been better. Then we get this scene where the coroner tries to call Dan, but she can't get a hold of him. And then we see somebody grabbing a drill. And it's very Myers-like, but it's super drawn out. I mean, this goes on forever. You can fall asleep waiting for this to happen. Then she tries to call the sheriff. Now that right there is the best death in the entire movie. It's the most realistic, it's not gory, but it makes sense, and there's something to watching her twitch like that on the ground. They just took way too long to execute it, though. So Dan is tied up to a chair, and he asks Cochran why, and he explains. And I'm not going to play the whole thing, but here's the crux of it.
Halloween, the festival of Samhain. The last great one took place 3,000 years ago, and the hills ran red. with the blood of animals and children. Sacrifices are part of our world. Our craft. Witchcraft.
So I guess that's why it's Season of the Witch. So then Cochran puts the mask on Dan's face, and they have Halloween on again, and they're playing the music. And why? Why do you keep reminding me that there's a better movie for me to watch? Yes, the original score of Halloween is good, but you can put it to just about any horror movie and it'll work. It's just a really bad call on the movie's part. Dan manages to escape, and he goes into a ventilator shaft and on the roof. He even manages to call his ex-wife so she can hang up on him. So Dan finds Ellie and he rescues her, and then they sneak across the control room. They find a bunch of silver shamrock coins, and he tells Ellie to wait there, and he sneaks in the middle of the room and turns the commercial on without anybody noticing him. Then as he and Ellie goes up the stairs, Cochran notices him and points it out to some of his guys, but they never go after him, and he just stands there. Then Dan drops the coins on all the robots, destroying them instantly. And again, Cochran just stands there and then gives him a golf clap. Cochran is one of the worst villains I've ever seen. He just happens to stand there and not do anything no matter what's going on. So they escape, but on the way there it turns out and this makes absolutely no sense. Obviously they switched Ellie with a robot, but if that was the case, why didn't she kill him when he rescued her? Or why did she let him destroy all the robots? She's just now attacking him, and this sequence goes on and on. It starts in the car, he hits her in the head with a crowbar, her arm attacks him, and then after that, anything to get one more jump scare in the movie, I guess. So Dan runs off into the dark, and he ends up at the gas station that we saw in the beginning of the movie. Dan uses the phone, and some kids show up trick-or-treating at the gas station, and he's able to convince two of the stations to turn a commercial off.
We are experiencing technical difficulties. Please stand by.
Then,
I'll turn it off. Turn it off. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it.
And that's how our movie ends. Inconclusive. What the fuck? I know the lead actor Tom Atkins has said at a con that he believes his character saved the world, but that's just in your head, Tom, because that's not what us, the audience, saw. So what do I think of Halloween 3? Honestly, it really pisses me off. This movie had such wasted potential. Now don't get me wrong, there are things I like about it. It's a guilty pleasure of mine. I watch it periodically during the Halloween season. It had been a few years, and my friend and I, Garth, had a disagreement about whether or not this was a good movie. I had to call him on the phone and personally apologize, and admit that I was wrong. There are actually still some good things, though. The cinematography is excellent. When it's trying to go for that dark horror atmosphere, it really knocks it out of the park. When it comes to the actors, the people that act like robots do a decent job, but robots aren't scary, and since I didn't know they were robots, it came off really bad. The lead actors are excellent. Tom Atkins and Stacey Nelkin knock it out of the park, and they have great on-screen chemistry together. Everybody else in this movie, on the other hand, just acts unnatural and awful. And what's really a shame about the two lead actors is I actually cared about their characters. I was heavily invested. So when you take the whole plot of Ellie getting switched by a robot, which we never see, and we never get a conclusion to because he never goes back and save her, so we don't know if she died. We don't know if she's sitting in a room somewhere. We don't know if she blew up in the factory. That's a pretty big plot hole that's unresolved. And then the ending just blows it for me. Movies are not clever when they leave the ending up to your imagination. Regardless of everything else, this movie could have been excellent up to that point, and the ending would just ruin the whole thing, because at the end of the day, an audience is only going to remember how good or bad your ending really was. Now, this movie gets a lot of criticism for being part of the Halloween franchise, and I think it's a blessing and a curse. If this movie had just been called Season of the Witch, it may have done better in the theater. We don't really know. So it was a curse on that aspect, because it didn't have Michael Myers in it and people didn't like it. But it's also been a blessing because if this movie had just been Season of the Witch, a lot of people probably wouldn't even remember that it existed. So being part of the Halloween legacy has gained it a cult status. I would also argue if this movie came out today and they were just like, here's Halloween Season of the Witch, and it's part of the Halloween universe, people would be more accepting of that, but that wasn't commonplace in the 80s. But I honestly don't think it probably would have done that well, even if it hadn't been part of the Halloween franchise, because a lot of this movie just drags. There's a lot of exposition and parts that just take a long time to go through. But like I say, it does have some fun things about it, and it has some redeeming qualities. The score is amazing for the entire movie. It's really got Carpenter's signature sound. I'm not a fan of remakes, but if you are going to do remakes, you should remake movies that weren't done right. And this movie had a lot of potential, so I would be in favor of a remake, as long as it wasn't Rob Zombie doing it. So if you're a casual horror fan, I can't in good conscience recommend that you even rent this movie. If you're a really big fan of the Halloween franchise, then yeah, you might want to give it a watch just to see what it's all about. But I'm going to have to give Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, 2 stars. And man, that's saying something, because I think this is only the second movie on my channel to get reviewed and get a lower rating than the Ghostbusters reboot. I would rather watch Halloween 3 than Ghostbusters reboot, but in terms of an actual film, Ghostbusters movie is better and actually has an ending. So with that being said, guys, thank you for watching the Derek Ruby Show, and I hope you're enjoying our Halloween month, as we have lots more stuff to come, and I'm so glad that you guys can be a part of it. Don't forget to check out the new Discord, stay for the credits at the end. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and Instagram. And as always, have a good one, and I'll see you guys next time. Hell yeah, Dan, I'm with you on that one, buddy.